Chapter 18, and we start off with an excerpt from Dr. Serizawa's notes. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos, when he was reigning in heaven. And they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them, but with legs and arms never failing, they made merry with feasting beyond the reach of all evils. When they died, it was as though they were overcome with sleep, and they had all good things. For the fruitful earth, unforced, bare them fruit abundantly without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things, rich in flocks and loved by the blessed gods. That is from Hesiod, Works and Days, circa 700 BCE. The sub drifted through the spectral city towards something large, much larger than their other buildings. At first Mark thought it was a seamount or another wall of the trench, but as they drew nearer, it gained definition. He saw that it was a gigantic sculpture carved into a living stone face. It was a doorway of sorts, not on a human scale, but on a titanic one. Carved on either side of the structure's base were two huge three-clawed feet. Through the cyclopean doorway, lava cascaded along a tunnel that rose in a series of large steps, eventually forming a larger fall that created the river over which they had been sailing. At the far end of the tunnel, a familiar blue glow lined the exit into somewhere. "I think we should stop," Stanton said, studying his instruments. "Why?" Serizawa asked. "Because I want to have kids one day," Stanton replied, "preferably without flippers." He pointed to his instruments, which showed radiation readings redlining. "Full stop," Crane said. "Hover the ship." The three drones continued on without them, dwindling into the tunnel, but their feed continued. "It's way hot in there," Stanton said. "Probes aren't gonna last long, but I'm picking up his radioactive signature up ahead. It's weak, but it's there." He had barely gotten the words out of his mouth when the feed from one of the probes ceased, quickly followed by another. The third kept going. A moment later, it entered a vast cavern. "Okay," Stanton said. "We've got O2, CO2, methane. Looks like some sort of air pocket." "Can you surface into that?" Mark asked. "Yeah, I got it," Stanton replied. Mark stared at the stream as the probe rose into an atmospheric cavity. Within lay a vast temple complex, and although the probe feed was starting to lose resolution, they could see him, Godzilla, splayed out, a fallen deity in the heart of his own temple, lava breaching up from beneath him. "Oh my god," Mark breathed. "Zilla," Stanton finished. Then the probe failed. "And good night, Grace," Stanton said. "Pull up the last frame," Serizawa said. Mark was numb. There was the thing that had killed his son. Beaten. Helpless. Logically, he knew they needed the monster alive, but emotionally, he wasn't quite there. He might never be, but that wasn't the point. Serizawa was right. He needed to confront this. Serizawa zoomed in to the volcanic vents surrounding Godzilla. "There," he said. "Those bits, they're the source of his radiation." "That's why he's here," Chen said. "He's feeding, regenerating." "This is his home," Serizawa said. The two scientists shared a look of satisfaction. "That's how he's survived so long," Mark said. "Always adapting, evolving. It's incredible." "Welp," Stanton said. "He doesn't really need our help. Dude, he's got this covered, right? He just needs a nap." "No," Chen said. "This process could take years, even decades." "We have to proceed as planned," Serizawa said. "Hold on," Stanton objected. "We're talking about launching a nuclear torpedo to revive a giant monster. It's not exactly like jump-starting a car. We have one more complication, Commander Crane said. Our weapon systems were damaged during a crash. We can't launch. That does put a kink in our hose, Mark thought. Maybe someone should have mentioned this a little earlier. Can we repair them? Mark said. I'm afraid not, Crane replied. They have come all this way, found the sleeping Titan, for nothing? But Chen wasn't discouraged. Okay, she said. So what if we go inside, set a timer, and detonate one of the warheads manually? No way, Stanton said. If the heat doesn't fry you, the radiation will. It might be good for Titans, but it's not so good for us. I'll go, Serizawa said. Mark thought he heard wrong. Wasn't Serizawa paying attention? What the hell does that mean, he said. Serizawa didn't speak, but his face said it all. He had skipped to the obvious conclusion that to bring Godzilla back to health, to have a shot at saving what was left of their world, someone had to die. And it would be that person. And he would be that person. There must be another way, Chen said. There's no time to debate, Serizawa said. I'll go. Now we cut to Sudan. Mkole and Bembe went through their line like it wasn't even there, crushing tanks beneath his feet, his tail slashing through the hastily erected high-tension lines they'd strung across the mouth of the gorge. Missiles from a jet painted the monster with flame, but he came on, picking up a Humvee with his trunk and lobbing it at the plane. As it banked for another shot, the jet turned into a comet, hurling into the desert. After the Titan escaped containment, Nez had managed to rally what remained of her soldiers, crowd them into a few remaining aircrafts, and get ahead of the monster. As he followed the Nile north, she only had about 20 troops, but that night the Egyptian army responded to her radio calls. The air dropped a small army on her position, along with some big guns and a powerful electric generator to charge the fence. They'd set the trap in the canyon and lure Mkole and Bembe into it by pestering it with aircraft. The hope was that they could damage his legs, but neither the power lines nor explosive charges that went off under him gave him pause. He shrugged off the collapsing canyon walls as if they were styrofoam rocks in a movie. None of their preparations had made a difference. Of the 200+ troops who had been there at dawn, she now counted perhaps a dozen, and they were all doing what she was, running like hell as the beast thundered after them. Problem was, it was a box canyon. The far end of it was a steep slope. There were still guns above it, blazing down at the beast, but they were only annoying him, encouraging him to rush up the gorge and silence them. She hit the incline and started up on all fours, but by the time she was 10 meters up, she knew she wasn't going to make it, nor could she escape to the side. The monster was too big, and the canyon too narrow. She drew her sidearm, turned and began firing, aiming for the monster's eyes. He crushed on, was right on her, and then he slowed. He took another step and stopped altogether. For a moment she didn't do anything. She stared at Mkole and Bembe, wondering what the hell he was up to. Then she decided it didn't matter. Moving slowly, she continued to retreat. She expected him to start up again at any second, but every instant he stood still like that allowed her to gain a little more distance. Now we cut to Washington, D.C. area. "Come on," Barnes yelled, firing steadily from the .50 caliber machine gun. "Yeah, you want some of this? I'll eat your children. I'll eat your mother. Across the cabin, Martinez was at the other mounted gun, also letting loose. Griffin was driving. She had already launched all their missiles. It had looked good on paper, Barnes guessed. A whole fleet and squadron of aircraft against one little monster, or to be fair, two. Unless you had been up close and personal with the monster. Watch Tomahawk missiles pop on its scales without leaving a scratch. But then nobody had asked him if the attack was a good idea. But he wasn't mad, not at the brass anyway. He got it. This whole show was about keeping the I can grow my damn head back dude distracted for a while, so the scientists on the sub could revive the big guy, and a few more civilians could be herded to safety. So no, he wasn't mad at the superiors who had sent him in there. They were out there too, fighting as hard as he was, and not doing any better. But he was pretty goddamn mad at Ghidorah, who as far as he could see was just an asshole. Full stop. He didn't have a lot of love for Rodan either, especially now that Rodan and Ghidorah were pals. Black streaks of disintegrating aircraft fell like rain from the stormy sky. The sea below was littered with burning ships, chopped on 90-foot swells. But those fires were going out fast as raging ocean dragged them under. And here he was, shooting at a monster he couldn't even see for all the smoke and clouds and shit. And their brand new offspray already all dinged up. Not a perfect day, this one. "Come in, Argo," Griffin said. "We can't take much more of this." "Copy that," Foster said. "We hear you. Just hold them off as long as you can." What was it that Roman mothers had told their sons? Come back with your shield, or on it, damn straight. "Come on," Barnes shouted, firing at a shape in the clouds. The horrors were coming too fast for Sam to absorb. The sky was on fire, the ocean was a wrecking yard full of shattered destroyers, and the bodies of men and women who had manned them. Up ahead of them, the cruiser, Philadelphia's guns were blazing non-stop, and a flight of cruise missiles leapt up into the clouds. They detonated, flaring through the mist, lighting up Ghidorah as he plunged down like an eagle. His hind legs slammed down close to the bow. The ship tilted up, her stern leaving the water entirely. Jets streaked by, peppering the Titan. The tiny sparks of small firearms flared from the Philadelphia's upper deck. The Argo drove at Ghidorah, trying to bring some relief to the Philadelphia. But suddenly, Rodan was there, diving to intercept them. The Argo rolled hard and dropped. Rodan clapped his wings and speared back into the sky like a meteor in reverse. With a heave of his wings, Ghidorah jumped back into the air, swiping two jets as if they were mosquitoes. The Philadelphia snapped in the middle. Her two halves settled back on the water like she was okay, but she was doomed. That wasn't good enough for Ghidorah. Before retreating back into the crowd, he vomited lightning onto the sinking ship. The electricity danced from point to point on the cruiser, and then the ship exploded, spreading flame in every direction. Rodan was clearly now under Ghidorah's control, and between the two of them, they had shredded the once mighty fleet in much shorter order than even the most pessimistic among them had believed possible. Admiral Stans was trying to push a signal through. It fled to life, showing the interior of his submarine, full of smoke and water, rocking crazily. Then it was gone. Whether because the sub had exploded, or because there was too much interference, there was no way to tell. The center isn't holding, Sam thought. More chaos. But then he noticed something. Probably below level of conscious thought at first, because so much was going on. But then he realized it, with the map of the other Titans, their positions. Before, they had all been on the move. He remembered Mark likening them to a hunting pack, but now something had changed. "Hey," he said. "Hey, wait a minute, Colonel. They're stopping. They're stopping. You see this?" He looked at the live feed of the attacks. Sure enough, the Titans in Barcelona, Egypt, Moscow, and Brazil, They were all just standing there like statues. What the hell's got into them now? Foster wondered. Boston. In the broadcast booth, Madison watched the news streams in from around the world. Footage of the Titans going quiet. Maddie smiled. She'd done it, or at least it was the start. Monarch had a chance to do things now. On the field below, the crowd was thinned out to almost nothing. A few more airlifts, and the evacuation would be complete. If anyone noticed the odd pulses coming from the stadium speakers, no one had come to check it out. But she was staying in case they did. She couldn't let anyone turn off the Orca. Anyway, she didn't know where else to go. Emma tried Madison's room again, but the door was still locked. She didn't respond to knocking. She left feeling empty. After Andrew's death, after the divorce, she and Maddie had forged a new life together. She'd thought the bond between them was unbreakable. It hadn't occurred to her that Maddie's connection to Mark would stay so strong, even though he hadn't been there for her, even though she hadn't seen him much at all in the past couple of years. She supposed it was easier to idolize someone you didn't see every day. You didn't have all those little arguments about putting away clothes or washing dishes and destroying the world. But it was more than that. Despite his spectacular failure as a husband and father, at his core, Mark was still a good man. How difficult had it been for him to leave his comfort zone in the wilderness? Probably very. But he had done it. He was putting his life on the line. Maddie couldn't help but admire that. Neither could she. Andrew's death had wounded them both, but in ways that weren't reconcilable. Godzilla hadn't meant to kill Andrew. His universe, his goals, existed at a much higher level than that of the individual human being. Godzilla was trying to keep the planet in balance. He had no malice towards human beings. She was sure of it. If a firefighter putting out a burning building stepped on a beetle in the process, would he even notice? Her grief had pushed her towards Godzilla's goal. If the natural world had been in balance, the Mutos wouldn't have emerged, and if they had, they wouldn't have had piles of nuclear material to feed on. Without them, Godzilla would have never come out of the deep retreat to fight them. Andrew would still be alive. She thought that if she brought the world to harmony, that would be a legacy for Andrew, so he wouldn't have died for nothing. Mark saw it another way. He just wanted all the Titans dead, and bearing that, he wanted to forget. She'd been called to action. He'd chosen to run. No amount of argument would have brought them back together. At least that was what she had believed. She went to the commissary and tried to eat, but she didn't have any appetite. Eventually Maddie would forgive her, and they could move on. After all, they were likely to be stuck here for years. There was no hurry now. She thought about trying to use the Orca again, but Jonah's warning had been far too vivid. She'd lost her son, her husband, her way in the world. Her certainty and purpose were gone. Only Maddie remained. She had already put her in so much jeopardy. She couldn't bear to put her in more. She was tossing her uneaten food when the alarms began blaring. Now what, she wondered, straightening. Had Monarch found them? Or one of the Titans? She hurried to the control center. She found Jonah there, looking more grim than usual. "What's going on?" she asked. Jonah pointed to a screen displaying a signal emanating from Fenway Park. She instantly recognized the cycling biosignature piggybacked master signal. "The Orca," Jonah said. She turned to look for the machine. It wasn't where she'd left it, and yet it was doing exactly what she had planned. Before Jonah stopped her, "I wonder who could have done this?" Jonah asked. Their eyes met, and she saw he wasn't wondering at all. He knew as well as she did who had done it, but maybe they were both wrong. Maybe she would find her daughter still sulking in the room, safe. She ran to Maddie's room and used her master key to unlock the door. Maddie's things were still there, her laptop, clothes, books scattered around, her pad. She picked the pad up and took a sharp breath. It displayed the family picture, the one from their stoop in Boston. The screen was broken, the image covered in cracks. "Maddie, what have you done?" But she knew that, too. Mark helped Serizawa into the diving suit. The bomb was prepped and ready to go. It was all happening too fast, slipping down a slope that was now almost vertical. There had to be some other way. He was sure of that. It was just, he couldn't think of anything. "We've removed the warhead's lead shielding and inserted a mechanical timer, so it can function in the radiation," Crane said. "On first contact, you'll start losing your long-range vision," Stanton said quietly. "After you surface, your motor skills will fade, but I added a helix mixture into your tank. It should help keep you stable longer." Serizawa nodded without expression as he took in the specifics of his impending death. Stanton was trying to be precise, clinical, to make sure Serizawa's attempt didn't fail. He wasn't quite succeeding. "Once you get inside, you'll have about 6 minutes, Chen said, "before the radiation..." She was too choked up to continue. Mark felt his own eyes misting up. Losing Serizawa, it was too much. Everyone felt it. He was part of the very foundations of Monarch, and of most of their lives. "It was an honor, man," Stanton said, reaching out and shaking Serizawa's hand. Chen grabbed Serizawa in a hug, gripping him like she didn't want to let go, but she did, and her arms pulled away, back slowly. "Thank you," Serizawa said. "All of you." He walked over to Mark and offered him his notebook. "My notes," he said. Mark took them reluctantly. "Are you sure?" he asked. "He fought for us, died for us. He's not only proof that coexistence is possible, he is the key to it." "Take care of them, Mark," Serizawa said. He turned the airlock and then entered the small submersible. Beyond the doors were sealed. The water began to rise. Serizawa was on his way. "He's clear," Crane said. They watched as the little submersible, like the probes before it, entered the fiery tunnel. Like the drones, Mark knew it would not return.